What if incarceration wasn't just about punishment, but profit? What if prison beds became business assets and human freedom became part of a financial model? That's the question being raised by Florida State Senate candidate Angie Nixon, who is calling for an end to private prisons and a shift toward criminal justice reform centered on rehabilitation instead of punishment. In a recent social media post, Nixon argued that education is one of society's greatest equalizers. But when corporations profit from incarceration, policies can begin to reflect profit motives instead of public good. She points to what many critics call the school to prison pipeline, a system where underfunded schools, harsher disciplinary policies, over-policing, and enhanced criminal penalties disproportionately impact low-income communities and communities of color.
Georgia has a school-to-prison pipeline that disproportionately impacts children of color. That's according to a new report by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which examined some of the state's justice data. 11 Alive's Doug Richards is live for us tonight from the Capitol. And Doug, is anything being done to try and help here?
Well, so far, the report would say that is still needs to be done by lawmakers here at the state capitol and around the state. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a left-leaning organization founded to help stop white supremacy. Its report says that Georgia basically has a racial justice problem, particularly with respect to the youngest black offenders. The report uses state data on race, age, and justice and concludes that young black people are disproportionately imprisoned compared to whites. While blacks make up 35.5% of the youth population in Georgia, the report says they are charged with 61% of all youth offenses, that black defendants account for 69% of youth sentenced in adult superior court. 69% of youth getting long-term incarceration after trial, and 67% of youth getting short-term incarceration before trial. Much of this is rooted in state laws enacted during the Bill Clinton administration, 25 or more years ago, says Delvin Davis of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
All that was politically rewarding to have policies that were more punitive towards children and teenagers, and force them to be incarcerated as opposed to more appropriate means.
Now, Georgia basically throws the full weight of the adult justice system at people who are 17 years old. This report urges Georgia to raise that age to 18. Similarly, Georgia will also, for the worst, most violent offenses, will allow 13-year-olds to be charged as adults. And this report also urges lawmakers to change that.
Does the report draw a line from young offenders from school to prison?
Well, yes, and that's the title of the report. And basically what they point out is that black school children are more likely to be suspended, put into alternative school systems, to be expelled than white children. And that, they say, is the link between what goes on in school and the disproportionate number of them in prison.
All right, Doug, thank you so much.
How's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Y'all called about the harassment?
A sheriff's deputy responds to a Georgia home in January 2025 about a child repeatedly calling their number and hanging up.
He's autistic, so he talks very distinctly.
Jamie Kanavika, a Fayette County teacher, shows the deputy sexually explicit text messages the juvenile allegedly sent days before, and then the deputy calls the child.
Hi, this is Deputy Marlowe with the Coweta County Sheriff's Office. If you don't stop acting like an idiot, I'm going to take out warrants for your arrest, okay? You need to stop contacting her, okay?
Alright.
Yeah, you good? You going to stop contacting her?
Yes, I promise. This number will get deleted.
Okay, because I know who you are. If you stop calling her, we can just end it there, okay?
Alright.
The caller is A.J. Mitchell, 13 years old at the time and in 8th grade. He loves reading.
I read all these books. I'm trying to
trying to get the whole book to finish my collection.
And airplanes.
Like, if you go to LA to Sydney, you're flying an A350.
AJ lives with autism and other learning disabilities. He sometimes struggles with social boundaries. The teacher who called 911 knew that. She taught AJ a few years ago.
What do you want to happen here? You just want documentation, or you want, because with it being a juvenile, especially a juvenile with autism, do you want to try to press charges here, or you just want documentation?
The teacher pressed charges, and the district moved forward to expel AJ from school. Instead of contacting his parents immediately after the initial incident, Fayette County school officials waited more than 3 weeks to let them know what happened, according to school records uncovered by Atlanta News First Investigates. Oya Mitchell is AJ's mom.
And I knew none of this. My husband and I knew none of this.
The school didn't tell you any of this?
None of this. They had already had the charges filed. Everything was done. We're learning. They wouldn't talk to us. That's when it became real that we needed counsel immediately.
Nicole Hull is the family's attorney. She says AJ's parents were denied the opportunity to intervene early before law enforcement got involved.
I've never seen this before. The level of intentionality to remove a child from the district, I've never seen anything like it.
Next, we have public comment.
A few months later, AJ's family and friends packed a Fayette County School Board meeting.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a little emotional because it's difficult.
Pleading for the district to change its decision to remove him from school.
This situation has devastated our family. Instead of preparing for his future, AJ is now being forced to defend himself in a court battle initiated by the school district.
This is not an isolated incident. Unfortunately, students with disabilities continue to face undue punishment in our schools.
According to the National Council on Disability, students with disabilities are far more likely to be disciplined, suspended, and funneled into the criminal justice system. 71% of children in Georgia's juvenile detention received special education services in 2024. A report by the Prison Policy Initiative shows Georgia incarcerates 968 out of every 100,000 people. That's not only the highest rate in the U.S., it's more than any free democratic nation on earth.
School to prison pipeline, graduating directly into our adult criminal justice system.
The Fayette County School District declined interview requests for this story, and the teacher never responded to our request. AJ's mother does not excuse her son's behavior.
You gonna stop contacting her?
Yes, I promise. This number will get deleted.
Okay.
But she believes the district failed to consider his disability before removing him from school.
How has this impacted him?
I say the worst case scenario was him telling his therapist that he wanted to unalive. He said he wanted to kill himself. Because I know one day he's gonna be without me. And it's something that I dread. I dread that for him. Now he has a mustache. Now his voice has changed. So he's not, this little quirky kid. Now he looks like a man. That scares me for him.
10-year-old boy with autism was handcuffed in his own school.
There should be no reason why you have 4 officers in a school for a 5 or 6-year-old that is having a temper tantrum.
Incarcerating children has become the new cash cow in this country. The prison system is designed to keep people imprisoned, and because it's a business.
I got caught up with systematic oppression. I really didn't have a fair chance.
So when people say the system is broken, I said, no, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
What happens in the classroom for some of the youngest students could have lifelong consequences. That's what's being explored in the new documentary airing on Fox Soul, Preschool to Prison. And this morning we are joined by the film's director and the founder of the Pioneering Possibilities and Company, Dr. Karen Baptiste. Dr. K, this is such an interesting topic, and I think it's something a lot of parents might not necessarily be aware of, but there's a disturbing trend happening in classrooms around the country, and it starts with some of our youngest students. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so Preschool to Prison is not just about the policies, but it's also about the children. Our children are full of potential, and and many of them are being misunderstood and misdirected. So when we start thinking about how do we change that system, we have to start looking at our policies, our practices, and our mindset. This documentary serves as a mirror and a map. A mirror so that we can see what's going on, and also to reflect on our role. We're either perpetuating or dismantling the pipeline. Your behavior is never neutral, right? And then a map where we support school districts in reimagining, reframing, and rebuilding how they engage with communities, how they're designing their policies. Is it equitable? Are you understanding the diverse needs? And we find oftentimes that that's not happening.
I think something that's so interesting is that a lot of this comes down to how kids are labeled. We hear language kind of frequently in the classroom, things like emotionally disturbed, intellectually disabled. You put that on a young child and it follows them potentially for the rest of their life.
Exactly, right? And what parent would willingly say, oh, I'm excited to have that label? This is why most parents are resistant to having their child be placed with special education and receive those services because of the stigma that is attached to it. While special education is a set of services, it has been used as a placement in this country. You know, it's like anything else. If you injured yourself and you needed to go to physical therapy, you shouldn't have to go for the rest of your life. It should be until you're healed. Special education should serve in the same capacity, where it's a set of services that children need until they no longer need it, and it almost becomes like a life sentence once they get that label and receive an individualized education plan.
Something else that you tackle in this documentary is talking about moving away from necessarily consequences to more restorative behavior practices for these kids. Something has to change in how we deal with when children have an outburst or a temper tantrum, right?
Absolutely. So I want to clarify, consequences can be positive and negative. We often use consequences as something that's negative, but the difference of that is we want consequences. Two things can exist at the same time, right? We can bring joy, we can treat children with dignity and humanity, but we can also hold them accountable as well, right? And we do that through consequences versus punishment. What we find is that schools are using punishment, not understanding that you don't have to punish a child for every infraction. Every outburst, right, is usually sometimes that resistance is coming from a place of pain. Every resistance is not necessarily coming from a place of defiance. But if you don't have that understanding, then it's a lot more difficult to create those equitable policies. So we want our adults to see the humanity in children, and sometimes that's a struggle because people want to get tough on making sure that schools are safe. Everybody wants safe schools, right? And we can do that, but we don't have to do that through harsh punishments for non-criminal activity. That's what we emphasize when we talk about preschool to prison.
And something else that I think is really important that we need to talk about is that this is a lot of education, but it's also putting in the work, finding ways to create change with policymakers, correct?
Absolutely, right. So there was a study that came out in 2019 from the State of Babies that showed that half of America's babies are living in or near poverty. That translates into them being 6 months behind in language development. That translates into them being behind when they go to school. More than 70% of teachers graduate teacher prep school without having learned how to teach students how to read. So you see how this system just starts to cultivate these behaviors that elevates the frustration for teachers. We need to support our adults. We need to ensure the enabling conditions that our adults are taking care of as well. We have not prioritized the well-being of teachers, right? And then that transfers into the classroom and how then students are treated, because there's so much pressure put on educators to perform that when that outburst happens, it's easy to say, I need this child removed.
And in Florida, the numbers tell a bigger story. Florida currently houses nearly 14% of its prison population in private facilities, higher than the national average. That means more than 11,000 incarcerated individuals are housed in privately operated prisons, costing the state hundreds of millions of dollars every year. But private prisons weren't always part of the system. They rose in the 1980s during America's war on drugs and the tough on crime era. Companies like the GEO Group and CoreCivic built billion-dollar business models through government contracts to house incarcerated people. And like any business, revenue depends on demand. That's where occupancy quotas come in. Many private prison contracts have included bed guarantees, requiring prisons to stay at 80 to 100% capacity or forcing governments to pay penalties.
Largest private immigration prison companies, GEO and CoreCivic, reported huge quarterly profits and told investors that they represented, quote, an attractive opportunity for investors, thanks to the massive increases in government funding. These very same prison companies donated millions of dollars to help get Trump elected, and now they're reaping the benefits. While the average daily population in immigration detention was fewer than 34,000 people in 2015, it is now over 65,000 people. And with the passage of Trump's big bad betrayal bill, which pumped an unprecedented $45 billion into ICE, it is estimated that detention will ramp up to over 107,000 beds by the end of the year. Hard-earned taxpayer dollars going to terrorize immigrants and pad the profits of private prison companies. What could be wrong with this picture? The two largest private immigration prison companies, GEO and CoreCivic, reported huge quarterly profits.
That $10.3 billion, who profits?
What do you mean by profit?
Who profits from that $10.3 billion?
The American people profit from it by better security.
Do any
That's why, do you want to talk about the number of assaults against ICE agents? The number of people that...
Do any private companies profit from the $10.3 billion that is allocated to ICE in this bill? Do they profit? Do any private corporations profit from this bill? Mr. Chairman, is that... If you don't know the answer...
I have no idea.
I can tell you the answer. The answer is yes. Dramatic profits. Record profits. Have you heard of a company called GEO Group?
No.
It's the largest private contractor for ICE in the United States. This is a news release from their third quarter announcing record profits by virtue of the money that Republicans allocated in the reconciliation bill last year. I'm going to quote. This is from their CEO. Since the beginning of the year, we have entered into new or expanded contracts that represent over $400 million in new incremental annualized revenues that are already under contract and are expected to normalize in 2026. This represents the largest amount of new business we have won in a single year in our company's history. He's talking about the appropriations that Republicans are championing, both in the reconciliation bill and now this $10.3 billion to add to the slush fund that ICE already has. That's where the money is going, to for-profit companies. The Brennan Center has described this as a detention and deportation industrial complex. That is what you all have created. They are making money hand over fist. And I think it's reprehensible. And I think this Congress ought to do something about it. And it's clear to me this bill does nothing on that front.
Critics say that creates dangerous incentives, more arrests, longer sentences, less investment in diversion programs, less emphasis on rehabilitation. Because when empty beds mean lost money, keeping them full becomes priority. Before prison privatization, incarceration was largely handled as a public responsibility. But over the years, mandatory minimums, 3-strike laws, truth in sentencing policies, and aggressive drug enforcement helped fuel mass incarceration. In 1980, America's prisons population was about 500,000. Today is nearly 2 million. Private prisons didn't create mass incarceration, but they expanded because of it, and they became financially dependent on it. And for communities of color, the impact has been deeply uneven. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the U.S. population, yet remain disproportionately represented in prisons. Hispanic communities face similar disparities. Research has shown Black defendants often receive longer sentences than white defendants for more similar crimes. And over-policing in Black and Latino neighborhoods continues to widen the justice gap. Is there proof lawmakers created these policies specifically to fill private prisons? No, But there is documented evidence that private prison companies have heavily lobbied on criminal justice legislation, aligning financial interests with higher incarceration rates. And Florida isn't alone. As of recent years, 28 states still use private prisons, but 23 states have moved away from them entirely. States like New York, California, Michigan, and Rhode Island largely rely on public systems, and studies show private prisons have not consistently delivered better outcomes in safety, recidivism, or cost savings. In fact, federal reviews have found many private prisons to be less safe and less effective than publicly operated facilities. But there's another part of this conversation many people overlook: prison labor. Under the 13th Amendment punishment exception, incarcerated individuals can legally work for pennies on the dollar, sometimes 13 cents an hour, sometimes 50 cents, sometimes just $1 a day. That labor supports food production, manufacturing, maintenance, packaging, telecommunications. Entire industries benefit. And while not all prison profits come directly from labor, the incarceration system creates an inexpensive workforce that benefits prison contractors and private vendors alike. And the profits are massive. Private prison and detention corporations generated billions in revenue in recent years. But while corporations profit, families often pay the price. High phone call fees, expensive commissary costs, travel expenses for visits, court fees, legal expenses. Mass incarceration has become an economic ecosystem, and Florida remains deeply connected to it. But ending private prisons won't solve everything. Private facilities house only a fraction of America's incarcerated population. Still, reform advocates argue they represent something bigger: a justice system where confinement can be monetized, where punishment can be profit, and where policy can be shaped by financial interest. Now, Florida faces a choice: continue investing in incarceration as an industry, or invest in prevention, education, mental health care, job training, diversion programs, and rehabilitation. As Angie Nixon pushes this conversation into the public spotlight, the question becomes one voters must answer for themselves. Should justice remain a public responsibility, or should profit continue to have a place behind bars? For Duval Connect magazine, I'm Candace Smith.